Everyone, good evening and welcome to our first Clean Energy for All webinar of 2024. Our topic tonight is talking trucks and transit for all. I'm Melissa. You've probably all seen me before. I'm going to go ahead and share our initial slide deck before we turn it over to our excellent speakers this evening. Give me just a minute while I switch over to that. All right, hoping everyone can see that graphic. Okay, so as I said, welcome to Talking Trucks and Transit for All. Oh, look at that. I didn't even mean for it to do that. Zoom setup as usual. Do keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking. Turn on your video if you're comfortable, but we are recording, so keep that in mind. Introduce yourself and ask questions in the chat. We are going to hold all questions till the end, but do feel free to put them in the chat as they come to you and we can get back to them. We are running closed captioning if you would like to turn that on. And then when we do get to our question and answer period, the raised hand function is in the reactions menu for when we get to that point, if you want to use that to speak up and ask a question. A few community agreements so that everyone's able to participate fully in tonight's session. As always, engage with kindness. We don't tolerate any forms of discrimination. When you're speaking, asking a question, do so from your own experience, and also make sure that you're leaving space for others to ask questions and share. Our time is always tight. If you're having any technical problems, go ahead and ask for help in the chat. We have Kelsey Krebs here this evening to help us with those technical problems. Our speakers, we always say we try not to use jargon. We try and lay out what acronyms mean, but please ask us to clarify if we do drop an acronym and we don't explain it. Ask us, if something doesn't make sense. Our time is limited, so if you have a question for Sierra Club or for any of our speakers that are not really on this topic, feel free. We can get back to you if you provide your contact information. Our contributors tonight. So we have with us Connor Deschmaker, Coalition Manager for Transit Forward Philadelphia, Alyssa Berger, Regional Policy Director for CalStart. Rebecca Wilden may or may not be with us this evening, but she is with the Clean Transportation for All campaign with Sierra Club. I'm Melissa with the Pennsylvania chapter, and then Kelsey Krebs, Senior Field Organizer, is here to help with facilitation. Our agenda, we're going to quickly do a couple of upcoming events in Sierra Club land, in quick overview of what the Clean Energy for All series is, and then we're going to turn it completely over to our speakers. So upcoming events, if you have not already received the invitations to the briefing, we are doing monthly legislative updates right now. Our next one is March 26th. Immediately after that at 5:30, we're doing a volunteer lobbying training for an additional 30 minutes. So this is a great opportunity to learn about what's happening in Harrisburg and brush up on how to talk to lawmakers. We'll get the link for that to you. Our volunteer open house is taking place next week. We're doing these monthly, Wednesday, March 13th at noon. If you're considering volunteering and you want to see the whole spread of Sierra Club options in Pennsylvania, please join us for the open house. And then some of the relevant conservation teams that are related to tonight's topic. On March 14th, there's going to be an evening meeting of the Clean Transportation, Clean Energy, and Dirty Energy conservation teams. So check that out if you want to learn more about those teams. Clean Transportation team is next meeting in April, and then our grassroots advocacy team is meeting this week on Thursday. CEFA series overview. Many of you are already familiar with how this series works. So here's our guiding vision. I will not read it out to you, but you'll have access to that on the slides. And our format hasn't changed from last year. If you have not checked out our previous episodes, they are all up on YouTube. You can find them at the webpage or on our YouTube channel. Catch up. It's not too late. I highly recommend starting with the series introduction if you have not seen that already. And then we're always collecting energy stories, right? We have used these to propel this series. We've brought in speakers from these stories. We've used them on social media. So if you have something to share about energy that's happening in your community, whether it's clean transportation, like we're talking about tonight, or anything else related to clean energy, the movement away from fossil fuels, please fill out this form, which is always available. We'll get that linked to you. And then finally, we have a feedback form that applies to this event tonight as well as to our series from last year. So if you haven't already provided us some feedback, we would love to hear from you. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Connor for our first section. So thank you so much, Connor. Thanks for being here tonight.
Of course, thanks so much for having me. Give me 1 second just to get myself situated here. All right, can everyone see? Actually, wait a second here. I'm gonna try one more thing. All right, how about now? Can you see my first slide? All right, awesome. Well, yeah, thank you everybody so much for joining this call, and it's a pleasure to be working here with our friends at Sierra Club. My name is Connor Deschmaker. My pronouns are they, them. I am the coalition manager for Transit Forward Philadelphia. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do, and then move into what Transit for All means, and sort of connecting our advocacy efforts from the local level to the state level. But I can also talk, if folks would like in the question and answer period to talk about what we do on a national level. Our mission is to amplify the voices of riders and residents in support of transit as a preferred mode of transportation in the area. We are based in southeastern Pennsylvania, and we are a coalition. That means our model is to work together with allied community-based organizations from across the 5-county region, just in support of public transportation. Here is an example of just a smattering of the members that are a part of our coalition. As you can see, it encompasses transit rider-centric organizations like the SEPTA Citizen Advisory Committee and Youth Advisory Committee, to political organizing groups like Fifth Square and Reclaim Philadelphia, to groups that are focused on the environment like Sierra Club, conservation voters and others, to elder and disability advocacy groups like Liberty Resources and Center for the Advocacy, Rights and Interests of Elders, to business coalitions, unions, and everybody in between. The reason for this sort of organizing model is because we believe that transit is a cross-cutting issue. It's something that touches us all and affects accessibility very acutely. It affects economic development, because we see that for every dollar invested in public transportation, we can receive anywhere from $5 to $7 of economic return. We see it as an equity issue, especially in a place like Philadelphia, where 30% of residents do not have access to a vehicle in their household. To an issue of sustainability, because if we don't move away from a private vehicle dominant infrastructure, then that means more pavement on roads, that means fewer trees, and that means more sprawl. So the more that we can have people in these shared modes of transportation, the more sustainable of a future that we can have. And the more that we can connect to nature, the more we can connect to our community members. Because when we are, again, even if we move into electric vehicles, that is a good thing, but it is not the whole answer. When we think about, again, road construction, road wear and tear that comes with electric vehicles being heavier than traditional cars, and the equity issue that comes with who can have access to these things. Transit equity. So when we talk about transit equity, There are 7 basic principles that come from some of our national partners. You'll see this is adapted from the Labor Network for Sustainability. Transit equity means that it is safe, reliable, sustainable, and affordable to folks regardless of income, origin, race, gender identity, sexual orientation, age, or religion. It means that the transit is reliably connecting people to the places we need to travel. Something that I've come to really recently is transit that connects us to our full selves. That means more than just jobs, because we are more than just our jobs. We need access to education, we need access to healthcare, and we need access to the great cultural institutions and communities that make us, who we are and be connected. Uh, Transit equity means living wages, benefits, and safe working conditions, and union rights for transit workers, and training opportunities for those from underserved and disinvested communities. It means a just transition from communities dependent on our current auto-centric transportation system. We recognize that, there are, because there is a spectrum of disability, that some folks are still always going to be dependent on single occupancy vehicles. And then also folks who work in things like construction, work in events management, there will always be a need for auto-centric, so we need a just transition in that process. And then rapid transition of our buses to electric from renewable sources. That becomes from the fact that a lot of times hydrogen is a source that right now is a very dirty manufacturing process. Transit equity means safe, healthy, and livable neighborhoods connected by transit and safe streets. That means the connections between our communities are ones that are safe, because if you're on a bus or on a train, but you exit and you're at an enormous intersection, or you're next to a dump, or you're next to an abandoned property, that's not a safe, healthy, and livable connectivity, and that means that the transit isn't useful to people. And lastly, transit equity means dedicated and sustainable public funding, so that not only do we have the infrastructure, but we have the support to be able to keep it running. Because when we survey riders, we see that the #1 priority that they have is that transit be reliable and that it be frequent. That is even above fare costs. So, and that is something that we found in our own personal surveys at bus stops and other transit centers, and it's something we've seen nationally. Some recent wins that we have had as a group are endorsing the Office of Transportation Infrastructure and Sustainability's Philadelphia Transit Plan. That means there is a framework for the city to invest in public transportation, strengthening our commitment to frequent, affordable, and accessible transit. Also, with regard to fair fares, just in this past year, we have eliminated the transfer penalty for anyone who uses either a SEPTA key card or contactless methods of pay. So that means if you have any kind of credit card, whether it is from something like Cash App to something from your bank, if it's got contactless, you can tap that and you get 2 free transfers at that $2 base fare. Also, children under 12 ride free, something that just came in the last couple of years. And we have created the most ambitious low-income zero fare program in the country. While it only currently reaches around 25,000 people in the city of Philadelphia, it is a true low-income zero fare program. A lottery for anybody who qualifies for other city income-based aid programs is eligible for the lottery. That means there's no extra paperwork to enroll, which makes it a really incredible extra feature for folks who need support in accessing transportation. And also, we want integration of Zone 1 of our regional rail stations. So that's many of the ones that are within the city limits of Philadelphia into all monthly trans passes. So really exciting, things that we've been able to accomplish lately. So now that brings us to some of our challenges here. All of our audience today is from Pennsylvania, as far as I understand it. And we are in a position where the American Rescue Plan funding is running out. That's the money that could keep public institutions whole in the presence and aftermath and recovery of the COVID-19 pandemic. So What that means is that, as we all know, everyone's travel patterns changed, everyone's commute patterns changed. As a very basic example, think about it this way. If someone commuted by train 5 days a week, but now they only go into work 3 or 4 days a week, that's a loss of anywhere from 0 to 40% of trips, and that's fair. And in a system like SEPTA, we are disproportionately dependent on fare box recovery for our revenue models. So when that American Rescue Plan money runs out, that means we have a structural deficit that we are facing in southeastern Pennsylvania of $240 million. Some of the things that could happen if we do not receive additional funding from local, state, and federal sources is up to 30% system-wide service cuts. That means entire regional rail lines and bus lines offline. It means fares increased up to $3 per ride. Other agencies across the state do face structural issues, though less urgently. So what we're pushing for, that I'll get into in the next couple of slides, is an increase in state and local funding that will allow us to continue the current level of service so that we can make changes and attract new riders to the system. Because what we've seen is that people have returned to the service, to riding buses and trains and trolleys, but at different times of day. And our historic route designs and timetables are based on a 9 to 5 commuter. If we look at what percentage of trips have returned on Sundays, it's pretty darn close to 100%. But when you look at those 9 to 5 times, sometimes we're as low as 55% recovery. So what we need to do is have time to move our system along and attract new folks to the system while we staff up, because like many industries, public transportation is short-staffed, sometimes up into the hundreds when it comes to everything from transit police to bus operators to the social workers that are a part of the SCOPE program that helps folks dealing with substance abuse issues and being unhoused that are on our transit system, and helps them access services. So what we are doing, we are one of the main conveners for the statewide Transit for All PA Coalition. The other, prime organizations that are involved in that are Clean Air Council, the Bicycle Coalition of Greater Philadelphia, and Pittsburghers for Public Transit. We work with transit riders and organizations all across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in advocating. You can see these photos from our most recent trip to Harrisburg last June, as well as in the bottom right from a testimony that I gave before the House Transportation Committee when they visited Philadelphia in the fall. This is where we can build power together. We can meet legislators where they are and show people that transit riders care and that we deserve funding so that our service can be frequent and reliable, and maintain people's access to the things that we need in our communities. Oh goodness, sorry, my last slide is not showing up here. Pause my share. Here we go. All right, can everybody see my last slide, what you can do? Give me a thumbs up. Yes, okay, cool, great, thank you, sorry. This is where y'all come in. You can join our call for an increase in the state sales tax allocation for the Public Transportation Trust Fund. That sounds like a lot of weird words. What that means, though, is that we're in a unique position here in Pennsylvania. We don't have to raise taxes or fares in order to keep service where we're at, because our sales tax is collecting in a surplus right now across the Commonwealth. We can preserve public transportation and give our agencies a runway to be able to make the service changes and schedule changes that we need to attract new riders and retain our current riders without doing the things that New York, New Jersey, California are all having to do to avoid major service cuts. So we have an opportunity, and one that is relatively conservative, which works very well for the fact that we have a divided government here in the Commonwealth. And again, the way you can tap in, I hope that in the chat, I believe there is probably our call to action. Yes, looks like it is coming in. But if you want to get involved, you can contact me, because we are, in need of folks who are transit riders and folks who know transit riders all across Pennsylvania, especially outside of Philadelphia County, who would do anything from sign that petition to call the governor, to be available for a virtual or in-person meeting with your local legislator, all the way up to joining us in Harrisburg. The opportunities totally depend on where your capacity is and where your interest and skill set is. But it takes everybody to maintain the accessibility and reliability of our public transportation in Pennsylvania. I am based in Philadelphia and I work across the 5-county area, but again, we're tapped in everywhere. So I want to thank you so much for the chance to speak. Yeah, we're happy to answer questions when the time is right. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Connor. Kelsey writes in the chat, I just took action. So everyone can click that link and take action right now. We will have questions at the end. We're going to pivot now to talk the trucks end of this webinar tonight. We're kind of putting together 2 areas of clean transportation that are not related to our personal electric vehicles, right? So there's our through line. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa. Thanks so much for being here tonight.
Great, thank you. I'll go ahead and put my slides up. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Berger. I am originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I currently live in Pittsburgh after having lived a number of places, including Philadelphia, which, despite misplaced sports loyalties, is a great city and very walkable. I am currently the regional policy director for a national nonprofit called CalStart, all capital letters. It doesn't stand for anything. And despite the name, it is not a California agency or just a California organization. We work all over the country, as well as globally, and we focus on zero emission trucks, zero emission buses, clean fuels and infrastructure, innovative mobility, so the multimodal component that Connor just covered, as well as some aspects of light duty vehicles, but sort of a more behind the scenes aspect. We do things around green steel, et cetera, and I'm happy to answer questions for any of those things. That being said, I'm here tonight to talk to you about a rule that we're hoping that Governor Shapiro will direct the Department of Environmental Protection to move forward with this year, known as the Advanced Clean Trucks Rule, which was promulgated by the California Air Resources Board, which does have a special status as part of the Clean Air Act for having stricter mobile source regulations. And that really does go into the nitty gritty. But if people do have questions about, it's known as Section 177, I would be happy to answer those as well. So what I'm planning to cover with you all tonight is just sort of an overview of the ACT rule. What is it? Why will it provide benefits for Pennsylvania? But also kind of where are things as it relates to the zero emission truck market, kind of tech readiness, and some of the industry themes that we see across the country, as well as in Pennsylvania specifically. So this probably makes sense. The freight industry is huge in the US. You can imagine all of the packages you've ordered to your house. We have more and more vehicles, particularly trucks, moving our nation's freight. And as I'll speak to in just a second, there's some disproportionate impacts there. And so there's really an opportunity, given how many trucks we have on the road and will continue to have, and likely will have more of, to make them cleaner so that we can not be polluting the air. We have quieter trucks on the road. There's cost savings for fleet owners and smaller mom and pop businesses, as well as the more national companies that you're probably very familiar with, like an Amazon or an IKEA. And as I mentioned, medium and heavy duties do disproportionately pollute our communities. So while they're less than 10% of the vehicles on the road, they do have an outsized impact in terms of greenhouse gas, NOx, and PM2 emissions. And it does tend to impact frontline communities disproportionately across the United States. So the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, we'll just go over some details really quickly. I will refer to it from now on as ACT, but Advanced Clean Trucks rule is what it stands for, the acronym. So the Advanced Clean Trucks rule is really the easiest, simplest way to think about it, which is how I think about it, is it's a sales requirement. So the onus of responsibility is on the manufacturer of these trucks and vehicles, not on fleets to purchase them. So really, it's just making available these zero emission trucks. And as you can see in the chart on the right, it increases over a period of time. This, as the third bullet point goes on to say, it just guarantees that Pennsylvania is going to have a minimum supply of zero emission trucks here in the Commonwealth. And I will take a moment to sort of explain where we are in terms of these vehicles are becoming increasingly popular for a variety of reasons with companies. So we're seeing companies, fleets, wanting to buy these vehicles, whether or not their state has adopted something like the Advanced Clean Trucks rule. That being said, once this is up and running, and we have sort of, as you see in the fourth bullet, this credit and deficit system going on, the manufacturers, which we refer to as original equipment manufacturers, OEMs, they will receive credits for getting these vehicles to states that have adopted ACT. And as I'll show here just really quickly, these are the states. Currently, 11 states have adopted the Advanced Clean Trucks rule. You can see several neighbors of Pennsylvania, including New York, New Jersey, and Maryland, have all adopted the rule. And this is going to be really important because the states that have adopted ACT will receive the priority in terms of who receives the vehicles. And as we know from several other industries requiring chips and critical minerals, there is a bit of a backlog still from COVID, as well as supply chain delays and some inflation impacted issues that, we're still ramping up these vehicles in terms of how many are made. And so, we want to get Pennsylvania in the front of that line, if you will, so that we're not competing with 49 other US states, but rather we're kind of in that top tier where the OEMs are sending those trucks to Pennsylvania because we've adopted ACT. And the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, it really is rooted in flexibility. When the California Air Resources Board was designing this rule, they were really trying to accurately forecast where the zero emission trucks market would be when the rule was implemented. So this isn't so much meant to be a reach rule per se. It's just meant to really create market certainty for the OEMs, as well as those entities, businesses, fleets that want to buy these trucks, that they'll be available, and for the OEMs, they'll receive credits for getting these vehicles to the states. This is not something that would be an outsized reach for Pennsylvania, and I'll speak to that in just a second. The zero emission trucks market today, here and now, is actually much further along than I think many people realize. So you can see here, and I apologize that the text is a little bit small, zero emission truck sales are increasing nationwide. And while that's not the focus of my presentation, CalSTART does work on medium and heavy duty zero emission trucks and buses, and have been for a number of decades. So we do have a lot of data and partners that have allowed us to see really how much this has kicked off. So you see 2021, how high that line is. And there's a variety of reasons. We now have federal incentives, a lot of state incentives that are bringing down and creating cost parity. again, truck drivers, we're hearing more and more like driving these vehicles. They can hear themselves think, they're not getting headaches, they're not sitting and idling and creating more pollution. There's a cost savings in terms of operations and maintenance. So there's a really big demand for these vehicles beyond just the health or climate benefits that we have to gain from them. And we just went over that map. This is probably less helpful, but and Melissa will put the link in the chat. We did kick off a campaign specifically in Pennsylvania, asking Governor Shapiro to direct the Department of Environmental Protection to start a rulemaking for the ACT rule. And on the link, if you go to the resources page, you can see a letter that was sent by businesses in October of 2023. One of the reasons we're really hoping that Governor Shapiro will act now and not wait a few years is that every state's administrative rulemaking process is different. And in Pennsylvania, we do have a lengthier timeline. So we'd be looking at 4 years because our process here in Pennsylvania takes about 2 years. And then the Clean Air Act requires 2-year lead time for the adoption for the OEM. So we're really hoping that Governor Shapiro will sort of hear that and understand that there's really no time to waste in terms of starting the process. So this is just sort of some background, and I apologize if it's maybe too in the weeds, but I do think it's really exciting to see particularly just the number of total models that are now available. And these are all zero emission models from class 2B to class 8. And then on the right side, you can see the breakdown by vehicle type. So we're really talking about everything: school buses, step vans, class 8 vehicles, cargo vans, yard tractors. And when we move into the question and answer session, I'll put a link to our zero emission technology inventory data explorer in the chat, but you can sort of play around just by clicking on different things and see how many vehicles are available in the United States right now, across which vehicle type. And it's really interesting to see how many models are available today. So as I mentioned earlier, why Pennsylvania, why ACT? First of all, we already have zero emission trucks on the road, and I want to go back to this map to underscore this point. You can see in the state profiles the numbers there. Those numbers indicate how many zero emission trucks are deployed in those states as of February 2024. So I was very surprised as a resident of Pennsylvania who works on zero emission trucks and buses to see that the Commonwealth already has 660 zero emission trucks deployed. Now, you look at New York, yes, that's higher. You look at California, yes, that's higher. But I think that it's eye-opening to see how many vehicles we do already have operating in the state. And then we have I'm sorry, long day. We have a lot of freight in the state. We have a notable number of zero emission trucks, including things like refuse trucks operating in the state. I'm sure many of you have taken a trip on the PA Turnpike. So we have a very significant freight flow moving across the state, and that's really an opportunity to clean up our air, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and improve air quality attainment for Pennsylvanians. There's some funding already available from the Department of Environmental Protection from the VW settlement. If some of you will remember Dieselgate from a number of years ago, every state received a certain allotment that then had to be spent specifically on zero emission vehicles. DEP just recently announced that they will use $40 million to replace over 100 diesel vehicles with zero emission vehicles. That should be kicking off this year and probably will continue through next year. Here, again, just really wanting to underscore the significant freight flow that the state experiences. So we have a ton of truckers. We have a lot of industries relying on this. And, I had noted that we have neighboring states that have adopted ACT. I do think Pennsylvania adopting ACT would only make it easier and more seamless for some of the regional and national companies operating in multiple states to have that continuity among, especially from the ports, New York and New Jersey through Pennsylvania to the middle of the country. So here you can see, and again, during question and answer, I can link to this report, but it is on the Clean Trucks PA site, the economic benefits of adopting ACT in terms of an increase in GDP and new jobs and potentially new investment in things like battery manufacturing. Here you can see, and I think I meant to have this earlier in the deck, so I apologize, specifically where we have communities impacted in the state from point source pollution, particulate matter, ozone, and where there's really an opportunity to clean up the air in those communities. You can see here, this is also from that 2023 ERM report. The health benefits really are significant. So by reducing the NOx emissions, and again, we're talking about these larger vehicles, they produce more pollution, particularly the NOx, avoiding deaths, respiratory illnesses, and healthcare related costs. Certainly, it will help the state meet its climate goals. I have served a 3-year term on the state's Climate Change Advisory Committee under Governor Wolf. They are DEP is statutorily required to put out a climate action plan every 3 years. There's plenty that's been recommended for the transportation sector. Not much has been acted upon or implemented. So I think many feel that ACT would be a great way for the state to move forward, cleaning up air for its residents, as well as decreasing its greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. And then again, this sort of just, I wasn't sure if there were going to be questions, gets into what's available for funding for zero emission trucks, specifically from the bipartisan infrastructure law and IRA. But that is, again, pretty in the weeds. So I'll go ahead and end it there and hand it back to Melissa. And then I'd be more than happy to answer questions. And sort of as Melissa and both Connor said, you know, it's certainly not a single solution. We need to get people out of single occupancy vehicles. And then for those vehicles that will remain on the road, like trucks moving freight, as well as buses, school buses, and transit, we really do want to see those electrified for all of the reasons I just covered. So thank you so much. And Melissa, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. And thank you, Connor. We do have quite a couple of questions in the chat, so we will do those first, and then we will start with raised hands. All right, so our first question in the chat is from Fred. What is the federal tax credit for large trucks? I heard the IRA provides a $40,000, but what truck sizes does that include?
Yes. Fred, you are correct. It's $40,000. I believe that is to be through Class 8. I will say that groups like CalSTART advocated for it to be much more, mainly because things like the federal excise tax that is placed upon these purchases, especially when they're coming from overseas, and I hope I'm getting that right. That amount is sort of canceled out by the $40,000 of the IRA tax credit. So actually CalSTART is working on at the federal level a congressional bill for basically for zero emission trucks to be tax exempt as it relates to the federal excise tax. But for the IRA credit alone for zero emission trucks, you're correct, it's $40,000 and it's to be through Class 8.
Okay, and then our second question is also from Fred. Does the federal tax credit for trucks have any of the restrictions that apply for cars, such as must be made in North America and requirements for battery materials and components?
The short answer is I believe it does. I believe Buy America is applied to all things IIJA. There might be some carve-outs or exceptions for the larger classes of vehicles, and I'm the state policy director. My colleagues cover federal policy, so I'm not positive, but I think that the Buy America does pertain to the trucks as well. And if that's not the case, I can certainly follow up via email, but I think that it does.
Right, and then Edward expressed interest in slide 24. And I said they're all going to be, all the slides tonight will be sent out to everyone, so you will get to see and study the details of what you saw in both presentations. Okay, and then Howard's hand was raised, so go ahead, Howard. Howard, are you with us? Okay, so we'll give Howard a second to see if he can come off mute. Edward writes in the chat, how many years does the VW settlement money go on?
That varies state to state. Some states are close to being done or have spent it all, and other states probably haven't even put a dent in it. And that has to do with who's in charge, who's governor, the state legislature. So I will double check. I think the Department of Energy has a website where you can see which states have what left as it relates to VW. But they kind of differ state to state. Largely, I would say the trend is most states are coming to the end of that funding. They've had it for a while and they've been spending it. So Pennsylvania has been using that for things like level 2 vehicle chargers, so a lot of kind of infrastructure. They're doing the truck replacement, which was just announced a few weeks ago. I'll put a link in the chat that shows you specifically how Pennsylvania is spending that down.
Okay, so Howard writes, sorry, I can't unmute. What is the nature of the opposition to act within PA?
Howard, that's the question. It's kind of a long answer, and I will do my best to capture it correctly. So a number of years ago, when states first started wanting to adopt ACT, we were seeing a lot of pushback from the Engine Manufacturers Association. And a lot of their members are the vehicle makers. They tend to be the legacy truck makers, Volvo, Cummins, they felt that why require them to make these vehicles available in increasing percentages if there wasn't going to be a requirement to make people buy them? There is, in fact, kind of a sister regulation to the Advanced Clean Trucks rule. It's called the Advanced Clean Fleets rule. It is a requirement for certain fleets to start buying and having zero emission trucks in their fleet. Right now, the only state that has adopted that rule is California, and they're waiting on a waiver from EPA to make that enforceable. So for a long time, that was one of the reasons. Then the California Air Resources Board and EMA, I believe last summer, kind of backroom channeling, negotiating, came out with an agreement. CARB decided, okay, we'll adjust a few things with the Advanced Clean Trucks rule if you EMA lay off with kind of the opposition at the state level. That's happened to a certain extent, and so I would say that we're seeing a little less opposition. However, Illinois just started a ACT campaign this year, although they're pursuing it legislatively, and they've received a ton of pushback. I would say mainly that has more to do with misinformation, depending on the trucking association chapters state to state. Some of the opposition is pretty visceral in terms of, we don't want this at all, whereas other states have chapters that I think have been pretty open-minded. So for example, with New York, we work with the New York Trucking Association, and we do a big sort of zero emission truck showcase every summer in a different city, Buffalo, Syracuse, etc. It's unclear what we're going to see from the Pennsylvania Trucking Association chapter. But again, it tends to be, the opposition does tend to come from the legacy truck manufacturers. So it gets a little more nuanced than that. But if I really had to sum it up, that's where we tend to see the opposition. And I've worked on, of the 11 states that have adopted ACT, I've worked on 9 of them.
Thank you. Do we have, I don't see any of the questions in the chat or any raised hands, but we certainly have time. So questions. Anybody? Fred writes, I put a profile picture of Rivian electric delivery vans awaiting transport to Amazon delivery centers. Amazon will deploy 100,000.
Yes, Amazon and Rivian cut a deal early on. Rivian is a zero emission vehicle only manufacturer, as opposed to a legacy manufacturer that still makes both. I've started seeing some of those those electric Amazon delivery vans around. They're pretty fun to see, sleek in design and very, very quiet. But some other champions, I would say, here in Pennsylvania that want to see or have more zero emission trucks in addition to Amazon include IKEA. They've been a huge proponent of zero emission trucks. Their North American headquarters is, I think, King of Prussia. So they've been sort of helping us talk to some people in Harrisburg, but a lot of companies do see a lot of benefits in these vehicles. CalStart wants to make sure that they're not only available to the larger companies like Amazon, but that they can also benefit the smaller kind of mom and pop owners that own maybe 1 to 2 trucks and are contracted out to do different deliveries. But again, that's a different presentation. And I see the question, Melissa, so I can just answer that really quickly. Yes, hydrogen is included under ACT as part of anything that's zero emission. Whether or not it's valid, I would say, and that's a link to the EMA CARB agreement. Hydrogen, I think we're still waiting to see what happens. CalStart does work on some projects related to long haul fuel cell hydrogen vehicles. CalStart's trucking team is not convinced that it's superior. It's likely going to be the case that it depends on the need and the distance of how far these vehicles are going. Are they domiciled in the same spot every night? Are they moving across the country? And kind of what their needs are there in terms of refueling or recharging. Tesla does have those Class 8 vehicles. CalStart was actually at that unveiling with PepsiCo and Frito-Lay. I've seen them in person a few times. They're really, really cool. And it's definitely encouraging to see those big trucks that we all see on the highway could be electrified and are being electrified today. And if I'll find some links to that unveiling with the Tesla semis and PepsiCo. I sort of want to take off my CalStart hat for a second and more as someone who grew up in Pennsylvania and works here now. You know, obviously this state has a long history of natural resource extraction. And I think that something like hydrogen, given that we already have sizable shale production in the state, I think it's going to be a tricky line for Pennsylvania to walk. I think that the Department of Energy is also trying to figure out, you know, what it wants to see from hydrogen. And right now it's being categorized sort of by different colors. So there's green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and the list goes on. I think that, you know, at the end of the day, battery electric probably has a more transparent accounting, if you will, of where that electricity is coming from, etc. But I do think there is an opportunity for hydrogen in the trucking and bus space to play a role. And I don't think it's necessarily one or the other, but I do hope that states don't play favorites, if that makes sense, or hold off on battery electric just because they're waiting on hydrogen for a variety of reasons.
All right, other questions? I see a hand. All right, go ahead, Bill.
I was wondering what the infrastructure setup is for these fleet transitions and how much money is available, any federal money for that, and what challenges are companies finding when they try to tackle that infrastructure lift. I know that we've been reaching out to schools on electric school buses, and a lot of schools seem to be a little bit nervous about setting up a new infrastructure around their site. So just curious what you're finding with the truck domain.
Yes, and CalSTART works on school buses as well, so I can speak to that in a second. I mean, the infrastructure is critical. I'm putting a link. So as part of IIJA, every state now has to submit annually a National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Plan, which is usually referred to as NEVI. And that goes to the new federal office jointly between transportation and energy. So I would say that infrastructure needs to be planned cautiously. CalSTART has done some research around what we refer to as like a phase-in strategy. You certainly don't want a situation where everyone's running out and building infrastructure kind of ad hoc, and then you have stranded assets. So it needs to be done carefully. It needs to be done in collaboration, not just kind of in a vacuum. And then, to your question, it's a lot easier to plan for charging infrastructure needs when we're talking about regional vehicles that are going out for a day, doing their usual route and coming back. And so then a company can look at doing what we refer to as behind the fence depot charging, as opposed to a trucker needing to find publicly accessible charging, but that's required too. So, what are we going to see available on the turnpike and elsewhere? And that's really what the NEVI plans are trying to do. Here's that infrastructure phase-in report I mentioned. And I do think that the joint office for transportation electrification will be coming out with the national freight strategy as well. So the infrastructure piece is critical. There has to be a lot of planning, with proactive planning with the utilities. I think there tends to be some fear mongering in terms of like, we're not going to have enough electricity to power these vehicles, etc. That's certainly not the case, but we do want to think really smartly about where we're setting up this infrastructure. And so, looking at corridors and so forth, Pennsylvania is part of there's currently, from the Department of Energy, an I-95 zero emission truck corridor charging planning project happening. So I think those are the sorts of things that we need to start seeing more of. Some of the private companies obviously start to feel impatient at a point. And for example, Tesla, when it was focused on light duty vehicles, it finally just went out and started doing, bilateral contracts with entities like Sheetz and others, because they wanted to start getting their charging infrastructure in the ground. The infrastructure for trucking, again, I think is going to be different for a few different reasons. Usually you may need to do upgrades, and so you're waiting on the utility to do a lot of things as well, which is why that utility partnership is really important. But the infrastructure, we're getting there. I think that federal and state agencies are doing a pretty good job. I think the NEVI plans are important. It just probably remains to be seen. I'll be interested to see where we are in 5 years in terms of truck charging, because trucks can use the same charging ports that vehicles can. Again, it goes back to, are they on a timetable? Is their route the same? Different restrictions that if I just wanted to go to the grocery store, I'm willing to wait and maybe charge in an off-peak time versus, a driver that needs to FedEx or what have you, make really sort of timely deliveries.
Hey, Kelsey's hand is up. I also see her question in the chat, but go ahead,
I was gonna say I might adjust that question a little bit, and it's more just because a few of us took action right here, but I'm curious if there are other ways that we can be taking action besides sending that letter and making sure, because I'm just thinking of all of the lines and potential cuts, and I know that I've been seeing some of these kinds of conversations playing out here in Pittsburgh as well, and these lines are and this access is so important for so many reasons. To see some of this kind of stuff being cut from our neighborhoods is really scary for a lot of folks. So I just really wanted to know, like, if there are other ways we could get involved, and also some of the pushback, if there is ways that we could be countering that, like with our messaging, or like what ways we're speaking about transit equity. I would just be curious. Yeah, that was kind of apologies if that was a ramble, but I'm just genuinely curious about what other ways we can be saying on top of that.
No, absolutely, and thanks for the question and interest. So I'm gonna put in the chat sort of my blog rundown of just sort of our current status. This does have a lot of statewide lens on it. There you'll find a toolkit that's got everything from a call script for hitting up your legislator and or the governor, to a letter to the editor toolkit for you to send to a local publication near you, all the way to social media graphics that you can use on any of your profiles. And, taken together, these different tools can help us show that transit is an issue that is, present everywhere, despite the fact that people think of it as a primarily urban issue. There is a form of publicly subsidized transportation in every single county in the Commonwealth. There is fixed route in many more than you would think. I don't have the number right off the top of my head, but point being that even in the most rural places, they have things like shared ride service that gets folks with disabilities and elders to doctor's appointments, to social occasions, and those sorts of things. And these are, essential services, and we really need to ensure that they have stable and reliable funding, because, one of the things that I hear most frequently is from disabled riders who face challenges with even the shared ride service that is explicitly designed for them is still one that can have canceled rides, someone coming to the wrong location, hour-long delays, these kinds of things that just feel unconscionable. To move it into the sort of opposition piece, I think that what we face is one, that sort of rural versus urban conflict. Anyone who's on this call who lives in the greater Philadelphia area or the greater Pittsburgh area knows how much a lot of times our cities and counties live in people's minds more as idea than reality. And so that a lot of times gets conflated with issues of public transportation. On the other side, we hear a lot from our local television news. There's fear mongering about safety and cleanliness on our systems. And I want to state that those are very real issues, and they are problems, and they will not be fixed by less funding and less consistent service. The things that really are going to address issues on our transit system is frequent, reliable service and a fully staffed workforce that is given living wages. So, if we actually had our cleaning staff, able to be fully staffed, then we would be in a much better position. If we had our SCOPE program, which is that, social worker-like program run by SEPTA, fully staffed, then we'd be able to meet more people where they are. If we have frequent service, people are going to be enticed to ride the service. All these things come in, self-perpetuating cycles, right? So when we react to negative things with cuts and less funding, that's a death spiral. That makes ridership worse. That makes our systems worse. And so the more that we can, recognize that all these things are, vital to the well-being of, our communities of all types, the more we can, build a case for this. And I think also I'll note with that rural urban, I am working on some tools that show SEPTA's, as an example, SEPTA, because it's where I work most frequently, contracts in counties all across the Commonwealth. And you'll see that some of the most pivotal manufacturing for and job creation for our transit system comes from all over, the Commonwealth. So in those rural counties, that's where manufacturing jobs are coming, is from our major transit agencies. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for going into some of that. I really appreciate it.
My final question for Connor actually is, you're the convener, or your org is the convener for this kind of work statewide. If people are in Pittsburgh, if they're in, let's say, Harrisburg area, are there smaller orgs doing very regional work, part of your larger coalition? I imagine you get what I'm going at, that we could recommend to folks to plug in.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're, not always going to be staffed organizations, of course, just because of economies of scale. In Pittsburgh, we are, very privileged to have Pittsburghers for Public Transit. They actually have greater staffing capacity than I do. I'm a sole staffer here in the 5-county area, whereas Pittsburgh Public Transit is a more rider union style organization, whereas mine is a community-based organization coalition. And they've, got a whole team of folks that are working on these issues in the Pittsburgh area. I'll also shout out the Lehigh Valley Coalition for Appropriate Transportation. LVCAT is their acronym. But they are focused on bike, walk, and transit. And they are going to be a great resource in the Lehigh Valley for these kinds of things. And then there is a Bike Erie group that occasionally dips their toe into transit. But otherwise, what we've been working with in a lot of the places that are outside of, our the major urban areas in the Commonwealth. It's meeting riders where they are, and then hitting groups like disability advocates and those sorts of things that intersect with transit issues.
Excellent. I think I recorded those correctly in the chat so that we have our record keeping. And I'll be able to get those out to the folks who are watching and the folks that are missing us tonight. We are at 7:30. So if I'm going to do super last call for a quick question, and otherwise we are going to wrap up. Does anyone have a burning thing they need to say or ask? No? Good. Okay. Thank you so much, Connor and Alyssa, for joining us tonight. Super interesting. Both sets of topics were very unfamiliar to me, so I look forward to rewatching and digging into these resources a little bit more. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. These will be sent out to you at some point tomorrow, so you'll have the recording and everything that was referenced in the slide decks. So we really appreciate it. Look for our next Clean Energy for All call is going to be in May at some point, topic to be determined. So appreciate everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye, y'all. Take care.